Ghost Story, disturbing college horror stories. Vermont winters were cold, but the old house made it feel colder. The four of them moved in at the start of the semester, drawn by cheap rent and the quiet isolation near the woods. It was an old Victorian-style house, tall and narrow, with a locked attic door. No one could open it. Ryan tossed his bags onto the floor of his room, unimpressed. David checked the heating, muttering about how inefficient the place was. Mia ran her fingers along the dusty banister, feeling a strange unease she couldn't explain. Lena, always quiet, stood at the base of the stairs, staring at the attic door. That first night, the house settled with groans and creaks. The wind howled through the trees, branches tapping against the windows. They joked about ghosts over dinner, but when Mia went to bed, she woke up at exactly 3:15 a.m., heart pounding, feeling like someone was watching her. David heard something too, a faint scratching sound just above his ceiling. He told himself it was mice. Ryan laughed at them the next morning, dismissing it as paranoia. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences added up. Objects moved, doors opened on their own. Lena swore she heard someone whispering from behind the attic door. One evening, she found an old newspaper in the library archives. The house had a history. 50 years ago, a college student had rented the attic. One night she disappeared. No sign of forced entry. No body was ever found. That night, footsteps echoed above them, slow, heavy. The attic door rattled. The sound came again, slow, deliberate footsteps above them. Ryan turned toward the others, his usual skepticism fading. David grabbed a flashlight. Mia stood frozen, her breathing shallow. Lena, gripping the edge of the table, whispered that they had to check the attic. The door had never been opened. No key, no explanation. But now it creaked slightly, as if something had shifted behind it. David pressed his hand against the wood. Cold. He tried the knob. Still locked. They waited, listening. The footsteps had stopped, but a faint scraping noise replaced them. A chair dragging across the floor. Lena reached into her pocket, pulled out the old newspaper article. The missing girl had been last seen by her roommates on a night just like this. She had complained about noises in the attic. The next morning, she was gone. David exhaled sharply and stepped back. This was ridiculous. It had to be an animal. Maybe the wind pushing something across the floor. But the way Mia looked at the door, the way Lena gripped the paper in her hands, it was clear they didn't believe that. The next day, Ryan bought a crowbar. If the landlord wasn't going to give them answers, they would find out for themselves. That night, they stood in front of the attic door again. David wedged the crowbar into the frame. The wood groaned, dust falling from the edges. The door didn't want to open. Then, with a loud crack, it swung inward. A single wooden chair sat in the center of the attic, facing the wall. And then, from the dark corner of the room, something moved. David tightened his grip on the crowbar. Ryan aimed the flashlight into the attic, its weak beam flickering against the dust-filled air. The chair stood motionless, its back facing them. The room was empty, almost. Lena stepped inside first. The wooden floor creaked under her weight. Mia hesitated before following. The space was cold, colder than the rest of the house. Cobwebs stretched from the ceiling to the corners, undisturbed for years. But the air felt wrong, like something unseen was waiting. Ryan moved toward the chair. The closer he got, the heavier the silence became. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the wood, a deep scratching sound echoed through the attic. Mia gasped, stepping back. David swung the flashlight toward the noise, but there was nothing, just the empty space where shadows pooled unnaturally dark. Lena turned toward the wall. Faint markings covered the wooden planks, carved deep into the surface. Names. Some crossed out, others untouched. At the very bottom, one name stood alone, the missing girl. Then, another noise, not scratching this time, a breath. Ryan jerked around, scanning the attic. Nothing. But the dust in the air had shifted. David took a step toward the corner. The darkness there felt different, denser. He reached forward, fingers brushing something solid. A hand, cold, unmoving. He yanked his hand back. The flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment, they all saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing in the corner, watching. The flashlight flickered again, its beam weak against the pressing darkness. Ryan took a slow step back, his breath unsteady. The figure in the corner didn't move, but its presence filled the room. A shape without features, blending into the shadows as if it had always been there. David house pounded in her ears. Lena, still staring at the carved names on the wall, whispered something under her breath. Then the attic door slammed shut. Mia spun around, hands pressing against the wood. It wouldn't budge. Ryan rushed forward, pulling at the handle, but it held firm. The air thickened, pressing in around them. David turned back toward the figure, lifting the flashlight higher. The beam cut through the dust, landing on the empty corner. Nothing was there. A sound rose from the floorboards, a low creaking as if someone unseen had taken a step closer, then another. Lena's breath hitched. She reached for Mia's arm, gripping it tight. Ryan shoved against the door again, harder this time. The wood groaned under the force. David turned toward the chair. It had moved. It was facing them. The scratching sound returned, this time from the walls. Slow, deliberate, the carved names seemed deeper than before, fresh splinters of wood curling at the edges. Ryan struck the door with his shoulder. It gave way all at once, sending him stumbling into the hallway. Mia was the first to follow, pulling Lena with her. David hesitated for only a second before stepping back, never taking his eyes off the attic. The air in the room shifted, colder than before. The chair sat motionless, the name at the bottom of the list freshly etched into the wood. Lena's name. They didn't speak as they hurried down the stairs. The house felt different now, heavier. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. Lena moved like she was in a daze, her fingers still curled around the newspaper. Ryan locked the attic door behind them. It felt pointless, but none of them wanted to leave it open. Mia sat at the kitchen table, hands pressed against her temples. David paced near the window. Ryan grabbed a beer from the fridge, his hand shaking as he twisted the cap. Lena finally looked up. It wasn't an accident. The girl from the article. David stopped pacing. Maya lifted her head. Ryan set his drink down, waiting. Lena swallowed hard. She wasn't just missing. She was taken. Mia shivered. The attic had been sealed for decades, untouched, yet someone had carved Lena's name into the wood. The thought settled deep in her chest, heavy and cold. David leaned against the counter, arms crossed. If this thing wanted Lena, they needed to know why. Ryan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. We should leave. Lena's expression didn't change. You think it'll stop if we go? No one answered. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows. The house settled, its old frame groaning. Then, from upstairs, the floor creaked. A slow, deliberate step. Ryan grabbed the crowbar. David turned off the lights. Mia held her breath. Lena didn't move. Then another step. Closer. The house fell into silence. The kind that pressed against their ears, making every breath feel too loud. Ryan gripped the crowbar, his knuckles white. David positioned himself near the doorway, body tense. The next step was slower, measured, right above them. Mia's hands curled into fists. Lena stood, her chair scraping against the floor. No one moved toward the staircase, but they all knew they had to. Ryan nodded toward David. They moved first. The stairs groaned beneath their weight, each step deliberate. Mia and Lena followed, slower, hesitant. The hallway stretched before them, dark and still. The attic door was locked. But something had come down. Ryan's breath was steady, but his grip tightened. He scanned the space, waiting for movement. David stepped toward Lena's room. The door was slightly open. He pushed it gently. The air inside was colder than the rest of the house. The window was shut. The floor was undisturbed. Then they saw it, the chair, sitting in the center of the room, facing the door. Ryan muttered under his breath. Mia turned away, her pulse racing. Lena didn't react. She stepped inside, eyes locked on the chair. The walls, they had changed. The names from the attic were there, carved into the paint. And at the bottom, Lena's name. Fresh. The sound of scratching filled the air again, but this time it was inside the room. The scratching sound grew louder, not from the walls, but from the floor. Lena stood frozen. The others backed away, their eyes locked on the wooden planks beneath her feet. The sound wasn't random. It was deliberate. Something was being carved. Ryan took a step forward, gripping the crowbar. David pulled Lena back. The scratching stopped. Silence. Mia exhaled shakily. Then the wood cracked, deep, splintery sound. Ryan yanked Lena away just as the floor gave in. A hole, jagged and dark, opened beneath where she had stood. Dust and splinters filled the air. David grabbed a flashlight and aimed it down. The beam cut through the dust, revealing a crawl space. The earth below was disturbed, uneven. Something was buried there. Mia covered her mouth. Ryan didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees and started digging. The dirt was loose, like someone had moved it recently. His fingers hit something solid. A box. Old. Rotten wood, metal hinges rusted. Lena knelt beside him. Her hands trembled as she helped pull it up. David forced the lid open. The smell hit them first, damp, decayed. Inside, wrapped in brittle cloth, was a small bundle. Mia's breath caught. It wasn't just cloth, it was a dress. A child's dress. Ryan pulled back the layers. Beneath them, fragile bones rested in the dirt-stained fabric. Lena stared, her face unreadable. Then she reached inside. Her fingers brushed against something cold. A locket. She picked it up, wiping away the dirt. The cover was scratched, barely holding together. She pried it open. Inside was a faded photo. A little girl. And beneath it, a name. Lena. The air in the crawlspace thickened. Lena's chest felt tight, her fingers cold. Ryan stepped back, his voice low. "You need to leave." David hesitated, staring at the bones. Then, from the shadows, a whisper. "Not yet." Mia gasped. The flashlight flickered. The locket in Lena's hand burned ice cold. The dirt shifted.